From News 5 and Fox 39, this is Hope for the Homeless, a Your Voice, Your Future town hall live from Johnson City.
I'm Caleb Perney. In tonight's town hall, we're focusing on concerns about homelessness in our region. We're joined by a panelist who knows about this firsthand, having lived on the streets right here in Johnson City for 2 years. Here's her story.
I was on the street, trying to survive.
Mary Scherzinger lost her home more than a decade ago, and after a series of jobs as a living caregiver, she found herself on the streets of Johnson City.
I went to school, got an education, and I worked hard. I had a mental health issue that was underlying in my life that I struggled with my whole life, but took its toll on me and basically overtook my life about 15 years ago. And I wasn't medicating with medications from doctors. I was self-medicating with alcohol.
Scherzinger describes the situation like quicksand, nearly impossible to escape. She ended up in jail after getting trespassing charges for her campsite and failing to appear in court because she had no car.
When you wake up under a bush and all you have is like a backpack and your shoes have been stolen, it's a different world.
Are the programs that exist in Johnson City right now enough to get folks out of homelessness?
The programs don't work unless the people work the program.
My understanding that the programs work, but the difficulty is that it's reliant on you to coordinate all of that while you're in a difficult situation.
Yeah, and it's very hard to coordinate, but if you're dealing with addiction too and recovery, there is that daily battle just to remain sober.
Scherzinger says it was people advocating for her that started the slow process out.
Miss Patty Muse, who was the preacher here at Muncie Methodist, a wonderful woman. She would chase the homeless down the street to get them to come into her service and get a meal. She did that to me.
Scherzinger also credits the former manager of the low-income John Sevier Center Apartments, who got her a spot, and then an ETSU program where she finally got proper treatment for her bipolar disorder.
It made me start caring about myself because they cared, and it really made the difference.
We see them every day. They're on our streets. They're in the parks. Some people see them as a public nuisance. Others see them as victims of circumstance. Are they one? Are they both? Hello, I'm Mark Hyman, the national correspondent for News 5 and Fox 39. We're live in Muncie Memorial United Methodist Church in downtown Johnson City. Thank you at home for joining us. The homeless in Johnson City. Tonight we talk about it. Now we've assembled a terrific panel of experts who will address this issue. Let's go ahead and meet them. Joining us this evening is John Redmond. He's the Director of Missions for Muncie United Methodist Church. Opal Fry Clark. She is a homeless policy strategist, a consultant to Johnson City. Mary Scherzinger. She is a homeless solutions advocate. And Christy Hammond. She is the President and CEO of Frontier Health. Now, throughout the evening, our live audience here will be asking questions of our panel of experts. But you at home can also join us in this important conversation. My colleague, Caleb Perney, is manning the social media desk. He'll explain how you can be part of the conversation. Caleb?
Yeah, Mark, so if you want to get your questions into our panelists, there are two different ways that you can do that. This program is streaming right now on the WCYB Facebook page, so if you just comment your question right below the live stream, we'll make sure to get those to our panelists. Another way that you can get your questions in is if you tweet them. Our handle is @News5WCYB, and be sure to use the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. Mark?
Thanks, Caleb. We're starting off with the audience, and I know this man's been waiting patiently. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and what is your question?
Thank you very much, Mark. My name's Daniel Peacock. My spouse and I are residents here in Johnson City. We live just off of Milligan Highway. And the question I want to tee up to the panelists is sort of one that I hope can help guide the discussion here as we start out. So, Johnson City has a lot of wonderful organizations kind of providing care and different services to people struggling with homelessness. Can you all speak to how those different organizations are organized and how someone would move through those if they were struggling with homelessness? And then are there any gaps, any sort of missing functions within that network of care?
Great question. Let's start with Ms. Opal. You work as a consultant for Johnson City, so you have some insight in this.
Okay, so that's a pretty broad question, but I'll do my best to answer it. So we operate with, just as other states do, with a continuum of care. So that's known as ARCH. If you are a person who's looking for assistance, you utilize the coordinated entry system through ARCH to establish your needs, and you can apply for case management there and get hooked up with their programs. Now, in the event that someone else has a resource that's more readily available, then that's when ARCH is going to make that recommendation to someone else to provide that for you. And I'm so sorry I lost the second part of your question.
What about the coordination, the gaps, and so forth?
The gaps, yeah. That's a fair question. I did a qualitative study in 2022 to kind of assess foundationally where we are and what things we may be missing from a service provider perspective. So I partnered with the Johnson City Commission in order to do that, and I interviewed a number of folks until we call, meeting saturation, which just means you're not going to get any new information. So through that, there were 3 predominant findings, which the city knows about, and it is no secret because I presented this publicly back when the study was complete. But number 1, that the city needs to have a role. Now that depends on what model you're using, the level of city involvement, right? So some cities have been highly successful at reducing the number of individuals experiencing homelessness from more of a support system for the other service providers in the area, and some have been a little bit more hands-on. But that is one area that we're working to remedy things. So the other 2 findings...
Ms. Opal, I'm going to interrupt for a moment because we're having a little problem with your microphone, so I'm going to ask Ms. Christie to step in for a moment and talk about, on the health side, what resources are available to help refer people beyond the services that maybe Frontier Health or another health organization would provide to someone who's in need. And
Sure. So thank you for asking that question. So with Frontier Health is a community mental health center, so we provide an array of services for both mental health and substance abuse needs. So if someone were homeless and struggling from a mental health or substance abuse concern, we have, just right down the street, we have a 24/7 walk-in clinic called Turning Point, which anybody can access at any time. An assessment's completed. We also have different levels of care. So depending upon what the needs are, and those are individualized, they could access those different levels of care. We have funding sources through the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Service for grants that help to provide that. So we don't turn anybody away for an inability to pay as well. And then what we would do from there is work with case managers. We would work with our folks from a housing perspective to meet those needs from that secondary. So if somebody were accessing and needed, say, detox from alcohol, for example, they could detox. They could then step down to a residential rehab for 28 to 30 days. And then we would work with folks like Recovery Resources, Oxford, and other providers in the area that help with housing from a transitional perspective to step them down for that. And then we would wrap around services with peer support, case management, intensive outpatient services, and so forth to try and help keep them engaged in their recovery for moving forward. I hope that gave a...
And Ms. Opal, I want to go back to you because I know we had some microphone issues, but you wanted to complete your thoughts?
Sure. I was going to say the other elements were a better bridge to substance use disorder services and mental health treatment. And the other thing was redefining policy and seeing if there are any problematic elements along that. So that can be anywhere from organizational to city to state to federal policies.
I want to bring Miss Mary in the conversation because you have a different perspective. You can bring this discussion about the challenges that are faced by the homeless. You were on the streets.
Well,
is it overwhelming, all the information that's out there, or is there a kind of a path where you could follow that would provide you the services or a path toward the services you might need?
Well, for me, it's not overwhelming because I'm aware of all these services. Unfortunately, for those who are unhoused, who live on the street, getting access to these services isn't as easy for them as it may seem. They live with challenges every day. To actually get to one of these places, like Fairview Housing,
Like Turning Point?
yes, like Turning Point, or to any other program that is provided for the unhoused, they don't work together. They have not, they consult with one another and they advise you to go there. But a lot of people who are living on the street they're almost like their hand held, someone to go between that, someone to facilitate these different establishments to help them to come together for them, specifically, what their need may be. A lot of them may suffer from addiction, mental health issues, or both. So what they need to do is to provide a way to put all these establishments together as one for them to work with that one person, if that makes any sense.
Let me do a quick follow-up on that. So for someone who was just recently on the streets for days or even weeks, is their source of information all word of mouth from others who live on the streets, or is there a place that perhaps they could go to to get at least a sense of what services are available?
Well, personally, I was on the street for a week, and there was no facilities that I knew of. I wasn't aware of any. I had not been told about any assistant programs. I found out by living on the street that there was a place called the River, the Day Center, Good Samaritan. I was told by other unhoused or homeless people that these places are available to you to help you. I did not know. I came in totally unaware. So it was from them that they showed me that these places existed. And I established myself at the Day Center first because that offered me an avenue to provide me showers and food, clothing, and doctors, which are very much needed for the homeless, assistance with their mental health and things of that nature. But I did not know when I first was on the street that there was even these establishments available for me.
So we could do a better job in society, couldn't we? We're back to our live audience. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what is your question?
Hello, my name is Carmen. I'm from Johnson City. It's nice to meet you all. And Mary, I just want to say that your story is beautiful, and it's a blessing to hear your story. And I just feel so honored to be able to ask you questions and see what strides allow you to get to where you are today. So I would love to hear more about your story specifically, what strides allowed you to overcome the mental health issues that you're referring to, addiction, to get you to where you are today. Can you share more about that?
Ms. Mary?
I have to apologize. I'm deaf in my right ear, so I'm really having a hard time hearing.
So you had a challenging situation, you ended up on the streets for a couple of years, but you've been able to recover and get off the streets. What were some of the motivations? What were some of the resources? What were some of the events in your life that got you off the streets and into a safer and healthier environment?
Well, that was the community. There was a lot that was happening for me within the community of downtown Johnson City. I hate to say this, that this sounds pretty strange, but the police, which may seem like a bad force for the homeless, actually helped me, helped to watch out for me when I was out there on the street. They protected me and they served me as an individual and showed me respect when I was homeless. That was hard for me to be homeless. The community itself, the downtown businesses, I played music with a guitar, and I had paint, and I painted windows for a downtown Grinch parade about 5 years ago. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years, maybe more than that, when I was homeless. They allowed me to paint the windows with the paint that I had for the Grinch parade, and it gave me a little money in my pocket, a little self-respect. And they allowed me at the farmer's market to play my music. And I'd get some tips, and the community would support me. They would just see that I was doing something that was, I guess, wholesome, trying to provide myself a way out. But yes, it was not easy being out there. The hardest part and the biggest challenge I ever had being on the street was facing the street itself. And that was a daily thing. And if it wasn't for the community around me, the church here at Muncie that helped me, goodness, so many, the day center, I stayed at the Salvation Army, I stayed at the Haven of Mercy, I tried the shelters, I experienced them for short times, but all in all, when you're living homeless, you're living hand to mouth. And if people are out there and they realize that you're living hand to mouth and they don't expect anything from you, they just give to you, it makes all the difference in your day. That's important.
I know Carmen has a follow-up question. Before we get to that, I want to bring Mr. John into the conversation. And so you have a different perspective because you have that close contact with people, with the service you provide. And Miss Mary mentioned a couple of things that I want to explore with you. She talked about respect and self-respect. And you must have some insight with the people you deal with, how important that could be or should be in helping them in their recovery. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I think respect in general, in faith, out of faith, is crucial for, wholeness in somebody's life. And I think one of the things that I try to at least give as a message when we speak on Sunday mornings is one, that they're a beloved child of God, that they're loved, that they're cared for, because so many of us face issues in our own lives, let alone being unhoused on the street where people are looking down at you, where people are screaming at you, where they're too impatient to get out of their car and help somebody in a wheelchair go across. Instead, they're yelling at them. So I think those type of things, the reinforcements of just encouragement is really key.
And would you consider self-respect part of the foundation towards a recovery?
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. I think it's, again, one of those challenging things. It's hard to have self-respect when you don't feel that respect around you. And until, we all have backgrounds and issues and things like that, and I think that's the thing that, again, it's a hard enough struggle when you're not having people pushing you down, so.
I know Carmen has a follow-up question. We'll get to that. And by the way, the producers told me that this is fired up on social media right now. So after your question, we're going to check with Caleb because apparently the viewers at home want to be part of this conversation. Your follow-up question is?
Yes. So I want to say, Mary, thank you for sharing your story. And I've had the privilege to serve with the Melting Pot, and it's a phenomenal ministry. So praise the Lord, and the Lord is working through that ministry, John. And so thank you for letting me be a part of it. I would love to learn more about Turning Point. So what marketing strategies are we thinking about to better advertise the services for mental health and addiction treatment? So first question is what does marketing maybe look like in the future? Second is, do we know what percentage of our homeless population actually seek that treatment out? And then what does the retention look like actual long-term follow-up care with mental health and addiction treatment?
Carmen came ready. I might be out of a job tonight. Miss Christie, let's go with you because I think you have some insight on this.
Yeah, sure, and hopefully I won't forget all of the different pieces to your question, so you may have to remind me. But as far as marketing at Turning Point, I know we've used a lot of different strategies. We don't have a large budget for marketing, so a lot of times we work with social media, We also, with Channel 5, as far as being able to get the word out to local communities, we also have case managers that work hand in hand with community resources to try and kind of share the information. We have rack cards and different things like that. Like in Bristol, we work with the Salvation Army hand in hand with a case manager that goes out there a couple of days a week. Hopefully might be able to start that here as well. We do have an ACT program that actually is community-based. So just a multi-pronged approach from a marketing perspective with a very small budget. So to share that. And next part of that question was?
Do we know like a percentage of the community that's actually seeking care?
I don't have that right off the top of my head. I do know that we see quite a few folks walk in at our Turning Point location located here in Johnson City. We don't have a walk-in center in all 8 counties that we serve in Northeast Tennessee. So of course we do see a little bit more, and of course that's limited to folks that can get to our facility. From Mary's point, you know, sometimes just that getting to that next step and even knowing about that can be a struggle. So that's definitely a takeaway for me here. And then from a retention perspective, we do follow up with folks as far as retention into the recovery. And we have a pretty good, if somebody completes from a substance abuse perspective, if somebody completes their 30-day at residential rehab, we're able to call them like 3 and 6 months later, and about 92% of those folks are still in recovery. So we have, if they complete the program, then there's a pretty good success rate as far as being able to stay in recovery.
Ms. Sopel, anything to add?
So I think the thing about data here that's important to keep in mind is that you can only speak to what has been surveyed and recorded. So a lot of the issues that surround individuals experiencing homelessness hasn't necessarily been funded by larger government agencies in order to do some of the work that you're talking about. I will say that around 43% is the general estimate of individuals experiencing substance use disorder or mental health issues. So we do have a broad demographic of folks that are experiencing homelessness, but don't necessarily, yes, they have a higher prevalence to substance use disorder and mental health issues, but we also have a large population that are not facing those issues and are still experiencing homelessness.
Our live audience came loaded with a lot of questions to ask our panel of experts, but the producers tell me the people at home want to be a part of this conversation as well. So let's check with our social media desk. Caleb, what do you have for us?
Yeah, Mark, a lot of folks online are interested about this discussion of the services that are available and how we raise awareness for those services. Let me show you some of these comments on Facebook. Robin says, I'm not sure the homeless can find a computer or phone. It's a whole different world downtown. I made this my home for many years downtown. This is always saying that they always want to be put in a jail, but I think the lack of knowledge for them to get help needs to be addressed. And how is that to be done? Jamie says, what should our local politicians and leadership be doing that is not currently being done? Kennedy adds, what is the best way that citizens can support unhoused people? And Derek also adds on here that homelessness he views as a product of mental illness and drug dependence, and without facilities to house them to promote treatment and recovery, it will remain. And finally, Spade says, what are y'all doing and what can be done for youth that experience homelessness? So that's a few of the comments that we're getting on social media right now. Mark?
Thanks, Caleb. Ms. Hope, I want to talk about that for a moment. Youth, we tend to think of the homeless in terms of adults. There are children on the streets as well.
Yes.
Something special we need to look for with that?
So I think it's important to understand the definition of homelessness. So we don't have one uniting federal definition of the experience of homelessness. So the way that HUD categorizes it, so the Housing and Urban Development, they categorize it as an individual that is literally sleeping on the streets or in a space that is unintended for human inhabitation. That's a really specific categorization, whereas the McKinney-Vento piece in our education school system, that is considered to be anyone who essentially doesn't have their own space or bed, right? So what we see with our families is more so couch surfing or doubling up, and that's a completely different number. I believe the Johnson City Schools homeless coordinator, Sydney DeBusk, recently reported that she's serving 283 families. And then the PIT count that we do for Johnson City, I want to say was roughly around between 180 and 190. So those are very different numbers to contend with.
We're back to our live audience. Sir, please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what is your question?
Hi, my name is Morgan. I live here in Johnson City. Over the summer recently, I've taken a position, an overnight position at a 24-hour gas station, and I've gotten to know a lot of the homeless community in those past 3 months. One of the things I've noticed is, like Mary's alluded to earlier, it's a really strong community full of people who are able to reach out to each other, point people in the right direction towards different resources. And one of the gaps that I sort of perceive whenever I try to do what I can to assist these people and turn them in the right direction is access to reliable internet services. A lot of these folk have phones. In fact, there's some pretty good government programs, as I understand them, to get smartphones into the hands of these folk. But finding a good spot for Wi-Fi, finding a reliable spot to access things like an email address, a Facebook account, a LinkedIn account, is a real issue. And I wonder what some of the things that the city can do to increase access to this beyond just like, Wi-Fi at a library or something such as this. I know in the past the city has considered free Wi-Fi in the downtown area, things like this. I'm interested in these sorts of solutions because so much of the job market and so many of these resources that they can access are sort of gated behind internet access that's reliable. Thank you.
Mr. John, now you certainly have some internet Wi-Fi available here, but that's transient for the people who come here to be served for minutes or an hour or two or stay for service. But once they leave, they lose that Wi-Fi. Have you heard from some of the people you work with where they look for internet service?
Yeah, I've not heard where they're looking for it. They're always asking, to hook up to our Wi-Fi when they're in there for an hour or two. But that is it's a major struggle for them that they can't seem to find any place for that. But that's not just for me particularly. That's not a huge issue that has been coming up for me particularly. So,
Miss Mary.
They do have an issue on the street, though. The fact that they can't keep their phones in their pockets because it gets stolen. That happens so much on the street. So they might have access to Wi-Fi, but they might have it one day, but the next day their phone's stolen, or their iPad, or whatever they had that they were using to connect, trying to put their lives together in our technical world that we have. But unfortunately, they do have it stolen. That's one of the things that's a hot commodity on the street. And it happens almost, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 times a day. And I'm sure this is something that, how do you get them to have communications with businesses and other family members if they can't secure a phone? Maybe if they had a place where they could go and have a phone access to a phone that would provided them Wi-Fi. The library is a really great place for that, for the computers, but a lot of them aren't allowed in the library because of their condition, the way they look or the way they're presenting themselves. So, yes, it's a big problem. I think communication for the homeless is a big problem.
Ms. Opal, does this city government, have they designated safe spaces, if you will? Are they considering safe spaces, locations where those people who are on the streets may at least be a little more secure with their possessions, and of course, have Wi-Fi and internet access?
I think at this point, we're still very much in an information gathering stage, and there's also actions being taken, like hiring myself as a consultant and the homeless outreach coordinator, which is no secret because there's been a job posting. So I can't speak specifically to Wi-Fi. I will say that the Salvation Army is opening a program known as the Center for Hope, where people can go and access computers in order to seek employment or services otherwise. And
they've been aggressively pursuing that program for the betterment of the community.
And let's go back to Miss Mary's comment. What about places where people who can make themselves more presentable, is the nice way to say it, so that they're not ushered out of the library?
The Downtown Day Center, as Mary referenced earlier, is a great place to go and get a shower. The river has been an invaluable resource to women experiencing homelessness. The Salvation Army obviously has showers accessible for the residents that are there. And I'm sure, even though I'm not as familiar with the Haven of Mercy, but I'm sure there are showers there for those residents as well.
So there is some responsibility incumbent on the individual as well to at least look for locations to, maybe I should shower and clean up if I don't want to be told I'm not welcome in a location.
I think one of the challenges that I've heard is that, for example, the day center, some of the guys, as we're joking around and different things, and begging me to hang out for a night or two and see what it's like, and they're like, hey, let's come to the day center and let's see what this is like, because it's like a mad dash, from what I understand, to get there first and to get there early. And so, I mean, you can imagine a large family and one bathroom. You see the movies and the shows where everybody's got a timer, to get in and get out. And I just think that again is another challenge to have to worry about. So
it's your sense we could use more resources in Johnson City?
Yeah, for sure.
We're back to our live audience. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, what is your question?
Hi, I'm Courtney, and I'm from Kingsport. I have a comment and a question. So, first of all, I work with One Source Communications here in Johnson City, and we do actually offer phones and tablets through the program, through the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is through the government. It is very hard, though, to find places that will let you set up here in Johnson City. A lot of people don't want that on their property. So that is one of the struggles that we have to overcome to try to help people to even get those devices. And then we do have people daily coming in telling us, they're stolen or they're broken or what have you. But my other question is actually for you all, for Johnson City. What are your long-term goals to actually put more facilities in those 8 counties that you were talking about?
Ms. Christie?
That's a great question. And actually, we've been looking towards trying to do some different things, because to stand up bricks and mortar there's a pretty large cost to that. So doing more things like urgent care, partnering potentially with urgent care centers, or doing those types of things to try and engage and have resources that are similar to walk-in centers in those different counties. We do have our outpatient locations that are there. And honestly, we've been working with access hours to try and make sure that we're meeting the needs that those communities have from an access to care perspective, just with outpatient services. Because even if you don't have an appointment and you show up at our Johnson County location in Mountain City, somebody's going to help you there and help work to make sure that you get your needs met. You're not going to be turned away.
I have a question, and then I want to check in with social media to find out what's happening to our viewers at home. Is homelessness generational? Is it one of these things where sometimes one generation follows another? Ms. Opal, any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I don't know why my mind was like, so you mean it's like a boomer or a Gen Z thing? You mean, yeah, repeated within generations. I can't speak specifically to the experience of homelessness, but we all know that there is generational poverty that continues to happen. And a lot of times that happens when there aren't accessible resources or mixed socioeconomic status opportunities within a community. So yes, generational poverty can happen, and it does happen.
I have something to say about something. Homelessness can actually happen to every individual in this room. It's not generational. It is circumstantial. But something you're going through and experiencing in your life may put you into a homeless situation. Every situation that everyone experiences that is homeless didn't get there from one particular event. It didn't come from genetics. It didn't come from passed down from their family. It was something that happened to them in their lives that was insurmountable and they couldn't come back with and secure their home with. So they ended up being homeless. So yeah, that's not, from my answer, is that it's not generational. It's
a lot of great conversation here in Muncie Memorial United Methodist Church. Our viewers at home want to be a part of this conversation as well. Let's check back in our social media desk. Caleb, what's the latest?
Yeah, Mark, we've got a lot of questions and comments right now. They're focusing on the issue of affordable housing. I want to show you the first one here. We got a rather lengthy email from Angela, but I've just picked out some sections of it. She says that she has end-stage multiple sclerosis and is in a wheelchair. She says, we've been searching for a home since being forced out by land developers in February of this year. Right now, still searching housing lists. She says in 7 county shelters are either full or do not have wheelchair access and cannot let me stay. She says, please, someone help us find a home. We are living out of boxes in place that is for sale. As soon as it is sold, we'll have a limited amount of time to leave with no family to stay, no one, nowhere to go, no car to go out and search for places. And she says she's had difficulty finding places because of medical debt and that sort of thing. Joey says, I think the city should buy the old Kmart on South Roan and turn it into housing for the homeless. Susan says, why is there a bill that makes Tennessee the first state to make it illegal and a felony to be camping or homeless on public property? And then Frank says, years of talking about the homeless, yet nothing is happening. However, Bristol can talk about high-end housing and boom, up they go at $1,500 and up rent. So someone please explain why. And he's talking about Bristol, but same situation in Johnson City where housing is more and more expensive, but less access, waiting list, in fact, for low-income housing.
That's a great question, Ms. Opeland. I want to pivot off that a little bit because we are discussing the issue about how to get people off the streets, and there were comments about poverty and how closely that is related to homelessness. What about training opportunities for someone who may not have a skill set to get them employment? Because it's more than just getting them off the street. We want to get them off the street with some type of income that they can move forward and not just be living in transient housing. What is Johnson City looking towards in terms of training opportunities?
I can't speak to any city government specific programs, but I do know there are a lot of workforce development programs that are looking to provide individuals with training who may not have had job opportunities readily available for them, or maybe were in a job position that didn't allow them to grow or had some insecurity behind it.
Ms. Mary, what was your experience in terms of what opportunities were available? I know you had some schooling opportunities that helped get you back on your feet. Are there enough?
Well, I was provided an education, fortunately, and I had some skills and I had the tools in order to do some things for myself to provide me an income when I was homeless. Whether playing my guitar or painting the windows downtown, I did things like housekeeping. I did other things to supplement my income, to make an income, actually. And for those that are unhoused, that live in the community, they don't have jobs because most of them are coming from lifestyles where they come out of jails or they don't have references or the education. And their lifestyle becomes their routine for every day. So to break that routine for them is really difficult because they don't have the skills, they don't have the education, they don't have references, and they're also dealing with the fact that they just came out of jail and they owe money and they got to, no one wants to hire someone who's just come out of jail. I mean, let's get real. So what they need is some place, like if the city could hire them as facility managers for the property of Johnson City, I just say just a few of them, and overlook the record that they are criminal. They are having, they do have past, they don't have references, but overlook that and allow a few of them to work as, I don't know, just facility managers. They could go around and they water the plants downtown every day. I mean, it's not that hard of a job, So they could hire these guys or girls that are out there. And yes, they would take the job if they knew that they could If they don't know that they're, that opportunity is there for them, then they wouldn't know where to start. But if you did have an avenue for them to get hired for the city itself, that would be an amazing thing.
Mr. John, I see you nodding your head. You have some insight or some observations from what you've seen?
I don't know about insight, but I just know observations of just when we have conversations with people, just one-on-one and over food, is that, there is a drive and a desire there to work. I've had several requests of hey, can you take me to this job at 7 in the morning, and, it doesn't happen all the time, but I think that is something that just the opportunities would just be huge for them. But I also think the challenges of not only education and skill set, but also, Mary, you mentioned routines, is creating new rhythms, creating new narratives about who they are. Because if you're not used to getting up and going to work every single day, it's challenging even when we are used to doing that. And so having that support system in place that can be there to have a boss that's willing to, come and get you, or somebody that's there to support you with that.
We're back to our live audience. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what is your question?
Hi, I'm Patrick. I'm from Johnson City. So we're talking about the Day Center. We're talking about Muncie. There's the health department. There's the Salvation Army. So, we've got lots of different levels of organizations here, the state, Salvation Army's international, the community, the local government. Could you elaborate on what makes an effective partnership between all these different levels, the state, the community, the local government, the individual, and just what makes an effective partnership to help our homeless population?
Ms. Opal, who's got the responsibility to tie it all together? Is it Johnson City, in the city, that they have the responsibility to, or should take the leadership in pulling together state resources, county resources, private, charitable? Are they really the folks that could make this work?
So I think, trying to think about how I want to answer this. So the city government is one entity of a pool of individuals that have to work. If we're only coming at it from a city angle, you're losing a significant amount of benefit that the other service providers are, have the capacity that the city government just doesn't have. Now, as far as their level of involvement, in my opinion, they're one piece of a very large puzzle. And for effective communication, I think it really boils down to some basics. Lots of communication that's efficient, effective, supporting other service providers in the area. That's what helps in aiding to create a comprehensive system for this.
Ms. Christie, what have you seen from the perspective of health, both physical health, mental health, emotional health? Is there some kind of coordination out there?
Well, in our arena, and especially in our region here currently, there's lots of different initiatives where different groups are getting together, interviewing peers, interviewing people with lived experience to figure out how to combat and join together and communicate. Just recently, this past Monday, we had a group of key stakeholders across 8 regions talk a little bit more about recovery resources and what was needed and what are some of the gaps. And some of that information actually came from peer surveys of people with lived experience that had grown through the system. So that was really good to hear, because a lot of times those are some of the gaps that you find. There's the accountable care community, where you have a little over 300 organizations together that are really trying to work on different key initiatives like reading and math at grade 3 for our children and what some of those needs are. There's a TANF grant that's come out of that through Bright Starts initiative that's actually helping folks who qualify for TANF to really build some of those resources with those warm handoffs to different services. So there's a lot of different grassroots efforts that are working hand in hand with TQE across the state, with our local government as well well as our state government to try and build in some of those resources. But it's a process, and it takes time. It takes a lot of communication. It takes a lot of collaboration and sitting at the table and sometimes having really hard conversations to get to being able to really have an impact.
Is there some type of entity or organization or position in government or private industry that should take leadership at all of this? Would that help?
So that's our continuum of care. So that's also known as the Appalachian Regional Coalition for the Homeless. So they're in charge of convening service providers in order to steer them into a direction, and they cover an 8-county region in our area. So yes, that does exist.
And just to add,
please.
Sorry, just to add to that, now that's on the housing side of things, but I think when you talk about the health, physical health, mental health, the needs from a social determinant perspective, I think it takes that group of leaders coming to the table collectively to make those decisions, because they each have different pieces of what makes that whole and that holistic care. So it really takes the team coming together collectively to really move the system in the direction it needs to move.
We're back to our live audience. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and what is your question?
My name is Cindy, and I'm from Church Hill. And as I'm listening to the conversation, I'm thinking, what can I do as just an individual to help? I mean, what would be the best way for me to get involved? Because I'm not, a government agency. I am not part of even Johnson City, but I'm feeling called to do something to help the community.
I'd love to get everyone's perspective on this. Mr. John, let's start with you. How can an individual come forward and say, I want to be a part of the solution?
Well, there's several things that you can do. I appreciate your willingness to want to do that. I think a lot of people do. They just don't always know how. I think, a plug from my perspective is Saturday and Sunday mornings. You can come. No, that is a way and an avenue for. In all reality, is that to join with the services that are already doing things. You don't have to reinvent the wheel with stuff. I think that as we continue to move in the direction of communication and understanding, I think that's the biggest thing, is just to find those areas and ways to plug in. I think one of the other things, again, this just goes back to like people being people and we're all humans, is that when you engage with people on the street, it's okay. Like, they're humans. And so I think just being able to be there, and if somebody is struggling, if somebody is, you have to be cautious. This is not a, go up to somebody that's, has a needle in their hand, but just being able to be there and walk with them and be a calming presence in an area that maybe is downtown and everybody is steering clear. You could go in there and you could just go up and just love on the person.
Ms. Opal, thoughts?
So that's a commendable question. I'm happy to hear that you're called to action. I'm going to echo a little bit of what John said here, though, which is reaching out to your local service agencies. There are already built-in spaces to provide that volunteerism. And so I know, Good Samaritan can use assistance in handing out lunches, and the Salvation Army can use assistance and volunteer hours to do a number of their projects. And those agencies are boots on the ground. They're putting the hard work in every day, and they deserve to be supported like that.
And they may not seem like they're working, but they do work. I can be honest, I can just tell you, they do work, those programs. And when you donate and you give of your time and you give of anything, it does come back to the homeless. It helped me when I was homeless, and I couldn't have survived the streets without the services around me, so.
I'll just add one last component to that. I think kind of knowing the resources and how to connect. If there's one thing that I hear from a lot of local community is, okay, if somebody comes to me and they have a need, Maybe they're feeling blue, they're feeling depressed. What do I do? How do I give them access to care? And there's a real easy way now, and it's called 988, that was just established not too long ago. And so that actually connects with our local call center here that is located also at Turning Point. And that serves our 8-county region and also Southwest Virginia up through the Roanoke, Blacksburg area. And so you've got local people answering the phone that can help connect those folks to resources. And the other key piece is getting there. So being able to help provide that support to help make sure that they are able to get to that resource.
We're back to live audience. Please tell us who you are, where you're from. What is your question?
Michael Gillis, Kingsport. Hunger First, Tennessee and Virginia. I'm a director there. I have a two-part question. I see that Johnson City is and has always tried to be a progressive city. So with that being said, and with all the programs all of your organizations currently offer, what is, if any, approach has been taken towards a housing first? And if so, or if not, what do each one of you think of such an approach? Second question would be, which you actually answered, ma'am. Also, are there any thoughts or action put towards a continuum of care, which I did not know about, which I'm actually interested in talking about. But knowing that I personally work, knowing the homeless there in Kingsport and personally work with them, now that you've answered that, what needs or what would someone do in taking such approach in doing that?
As far as like convening agencies, I'm assuming, is that what you're talking about from the city government standpoint?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit there.
Yeah, so first of all, if you're a nonprofit and you're not aware of your COC, you should be a part of them. And I'm happy to provide you with that information afterwards. As far as the city government comes from, I think one of the things that we're working on developing is a strategic plan to reduce the number of individuals experiencing homelessness. Now, that being said, strategic plans are kind of a monster and an arduous process. So through that work, we're hoping to establish measurable and mutually agreed upon goals in order to help us achieve our goals and see some results on the other side. So I will say that's one thing that is instrumental in the work that we're currently doing in order to see a reduction in that experience.
I have a question. Are we optimistic we're moving in the right direction? Miss Mary, from your perspective, are we making progress?
Yes, that's the answer for that. You know, like I said, I was homeless out here about 6 years ago. Actually, I got homeless 8 years ago in Johnson City. And I wasn't aware of the programs. I wish that I had known about the river, the day center, and other programs that were available to me at that time, but I was just fresh on the street. And that was a difficult transition for me because you have to learn how to live on the street, and that's a challenge in itself. So the programs that were there, I wasn't familiar with them. There was no one-stop center where I could go in and say, hey, I'm homeless. Can you help me? I was just told by other homeless people that these are the places you can go to get this help or that help. And I stumbled through. I think that there probably should be a one-stop place for the homeless in downtown Johnson City. Possibly, just to throw it out there, a park that's just for the homeless, that has porta potties and maybe water fountains, and also provides them shelter with electrical access so they can get their phones charged. And a park would provide them a place that they could hang out, lay around, and that they're not laying around downtown. They're not just hanging out in front of the library or at John Sevier. They're not just hanging out in places that make residents feel unsafe. So I know I went off track, but the point I'm trying to make is, yes, there should be a one-stop place for the homeless, that when they become homeless or someone is just experiencing coming into town, that they can go, oh, this is where we're going to get the services. This is where we need to go. So, yes.
We're running short on time here. I want to check back in with our viewers at home because the producer's telling me that social media is blowing up right now. Caleb, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so Mark, one person had asked they were not able to understand about the mental health crisis hotline. That's 988 if you didn't catch that. Also, I want to show you a couple of comments on a variety of issues we've been getting. Spade says, I know that LGBTQ faces big discrimination when they try to get help from churches. Are there any specific help or resources for that or things that they can do to get help? Jim and Rita bring up more and more people are also becoming homeless due to landlords being allowed to charge any amount of rent that they want. In most cases, rent has doubled or tripled. There should be a regulation and cap that landlords on the amount of what they're able to charge. Rents keep rising, but wages do not keep up, and the essentials are costing more. It's very hard for the retired folks as well, as they do not draw a lot in Social Security. And Kennedy says, we really need to discuss affordable housing. How are people supposed to escape homelessness if there are no homes available for them and their income? Mark?
That's a recurring issue, isn't it, Ms. Opal? The cost of housing.
Yes, so that's an issue nationwide. Specifically in Johnson City, we don't have rent control policies. So that's definitely, in my opinion, a thing that we should be investigating for sure.
We're almost out of time. I've got time for one quick answer here. So, Mr. John, I did ask about optimism. Are you optimistic about where we're moving in this direction in Johnson City?
Yeah, of course, if you're asking about optimism, you asked obviously the right person, just because that's where I live and people get annoyed by it. But I think that there's hope. I think that you all that are here, listen to all, I just want to keep amen in the comments, because it's like people are concerned about it. And I think as long as people are concerned, I think that we will find solutions, and the people that help, that volunteer and that engage, and that, you dedicate your life. This is big stuff. And so I think, how can we not be hopeful?
Ms. Christie, I got about 30 seconds for you. Feeling pretty good about where we're headed?
Yes. I think it's great to see the crowd here. It's great to hear the comments and the questions. And I'm always a glass half full kind of gal. So, yes.
All right, we're starting to run out of time here. We can all agree that living on the street is not the best way for someone to spend their life. A society wants to get people off the street and into safe and healthy environments. The question is, what is the path forward? How do we make that happen? We hope we've answered some of the questions you've had on this broad topic tonight. We'd like to thank Muncie Memorial United Methodist Church for hosting us this evening. We'd like to thank everyone at home who's been a part of this conversation. We certainly appreciate the effort and the time for our panelists. We encourage you to continue the conversation on Facebook.com/News5WCYB. We're continuing this conversation for the next several hours. On behalf of my colleague, Caleb, and the fine crew of Fox 39, thank you at home for joining us. In closing, we'd like to salute our military, law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, and other emergency personnel for their service to our communities and our nation. I'm Mark Hyman. Good night.
Thanks for joining us for Hope for the Homeless, a Your Voice, Your Future town hall from Johnson City.